it's a great quote that I read. I can't remember from where, but some people, and it was fascinating. It was about relationships, and some people sleep in the same bed and dream different dreams.
If you want and need complete control, go solo, right? And for some things, especially a personal brand or personal visions or something that's really close, that's absolutely the way to go. But if you're looking for scale in some way to have massive impact, right? And one of the businesses we want to affect millions. We want to have a huge impact upon the world. A lot of times partnerships. And that partnership may be a business owner, it may be affiliates. There's a lot of ways to do business partnerships. But I believe partnership is the absolute best way to accomplish scale.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Season 1, Episode 9 of the Community Made Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gaynard. In our last episode, Episode 8, I shared a great conversation with 10-figure business builder, Mr. Jim Estill. In that episode, we talked about lessons learned going from $0 to $2 billion a year in sales, how to remove yourself as the bottleneck and decide on key hires, how the more money you have, the more impact you can make, and much more. That episode was just filled with wisdom. So if you didn't listen to it yet, I highly recommend it. One of the best conversations I've ever had on the podcast. In today's episode, I go deep with two of my closest friends, UJ Ramdas of Intelligent Change. They are the producers of the 5-Minute Journal and the Productivity Planner, two products that Tim Ferriss is a huge fan of, and a lot of other amazing people as well. And Chris Plough, who is a adventurer extraordinaire who recently exited his company. I mean, Chris is just a wild man. He rode a rickshaw across India, drove an ambulance from London, England to Mongolia, rode a motorcycle across Siberia. He is he's one of a kind, that is for sure. But in this episode today, we talk about partnerships. We talk about the importance of personal awareness when it comes to those said partnerships and the value of setting and communicating a vision. Now, you should know two things before going into this episode. First, it's a fun and laid-back conversation recorded while we were vacationing in the Bahamas. So there's the occasional swear, meaning that if you have sensitive ears, you may want to skip this one. The second thing is I recorded this before I knew what I was going to call the podcast. So you'll hear me call it, I think, the Mastermind Talks Jason Gaynard podcast or something along those lines. So mind that part of the conversation. But one thing I'll actually also throw in there is that the one thing I love about this particular recording is that I'm not afraid to expose my ignorance. Sometimes I'm always looking to expose blind spots and get privy to different points of view and those kind of things. And I went into this conversation not fully understanding and grasping the value of setting a strong vision. And that was one of my biggest takeaways from this episode. So I hope you enjoy Episode 9 with UJ Ramdas and Chris Plough. Way better.
And that is not what they should sound like.
They should sound like
They
this.
should sound like.
Okay, who's who?
Sound like
I gotta make sure I turn UJ
Down.
off. Okay, who's this? The Chris Plough?
This is Mr. Plough.
You're a nice 6 or 7?
I don't know. I'm right here. I'll just keep talking and you choose what
UJ,
you
you're
want.
low.
This.
Oh, too loud. Nobody wants to hear that shit.
This.
When did Jason become such a dick?
I don't know if
He's always one. He just shows it more.
now I'm owning it.
Owning it.
I'm owning it.
He's owning his dickness.
Also, I'm tired. I don't even know if I want to do a test. I think I should go right into this and cross my fingers that it's working and it's recording.
That's basically a great metaphor for your life.
Is there an what? That I'm a dick?
Yeah, that's not a metaphor. That's an assessment of his life.
No, metaphor. What you just said. I'm just gonna not.
Why'd you move your microphone?
Because I'm trying to drink some water.
But now your levels are off, dude. You gotta learn how to do both. See, like this right here.
There we go. Okay. Can
You're never going to be popular.
It's okay. I'm great. I'm enjoying it.
Wait,
okay?
why? Does he want to be popular?
I guess maybe not. Wants to go under the radar as an unknown for life. All right, so Okay. Well, I was going to give context as to where we're recording and all that kind of stuff, and then Chris just drew genitalia on I gave him a sheet of paper to brainstorm things on the topic of eyes. He drew some eyes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so welcome to the Mastermind Talks Jason Gaynard podcast of sorts. I used to label these as Mastermind Dinners because they take place during a dinner or after dinner. UJ was actually on my first episode, which is yet to be released at the time of this recording, and still don't know a name for these specific style of episodes, but a little bit of context. We're in Eleuthera, Bahamas right now. Chris, you're killing me with those drawings. We're in Eleuthera, Bahamas right now, and earlier today, basically we rented out a, I guess, small resort and just chilling with a bunch of my favorite people for the next week. So we're getting close to the end of our trip now.
Tomorrow is like the last day before people start leaving.
It is. Well, UJ and I are staying till the 21st. But yeah, earlier today, we were in the car, and we had a lovely drive on the way to an incredible experience that we may have time to chime in on, maybe not. But while we were there, we had a guy named Rob, and Rob has a podcast called Fail On. It's coming out, so I'm not sure if it'll be out at the time of this recording or at the time of this release. But he was very, I guess, ingenious on some level and ended up taking my podcast equipment and recording a podcast episode on the way to our kayaking excursion at the top of the island. So we did about a 45-minute episode, and it really had no theme or kind of through line initially. It was just BS banter. But eventually the topic of partnerships came up, and there was just a really, really cool discussion around it. And at first I thought, Rob's audience this is just over the head. It's not going to do them any good. I really wish this episode was for Mastermind Talks, but I played along with it.
Steal a portion of it still.
I don't think so. I'm hoping we can recreate it. Okay. I'm hoping that the session in the car was simply just a dry run. Chris, you're killing me, dude. So again, context is drawing photos that are inappropriate for podcasting. Yeah, we just had a really great session in the car talking about partnerships. We all have different philosophies, all have different experiences, and I think we're both extremes. From you guys have had partnerships and almost swear by them on some contexts. Chris, you have more of a balance, and I guess you see the benefit of both. UJ his first business is in a partnership, and it's going really well for him. I myself have had 2 failed partnerships on some level, so there's I've been harmed and wounded by that, but there's definitely things I do differently, and I just really, really enjoyed the conversation. So after dinner this evening, this is the latest I've ever recorded a podcast, so I hope it comes out coherently. At dinner tonight, I basically asked UJ and Chris if they would be willing to hop on the mic and share some of those philosophies again and maybe dig a little deeper when it comes to best practices around partnerships. So I think first the best place to start would be to set context as far as your experience with partnerships and what that looks like. So I will start to my right, which is UJ Ramdas from Intelligent Change. I've known UJ for 5 years. Probably
More, yeah.
Yeah, 5 years. Yeah, something like that. And UJ is how long have you been in business now? 4 years?
Officially just over 4.
Officially just over 4 years. And this is his first kind of jaunt into entrepreneurship, and partnered with one of his longtime best friends, Alex Icon. Do you want to give some context in regards to the business and how the partnership came to be?
Yeah, it was unexpected, and it just really happened after the way I like to foster friendships is just like spend lots of time with close friends, and just 3 to 5 hours is a typical jaunt for me, and so on one such walk, we had like a walk in a beautiful summer day. I was talking about my morning routine. I was talking about my journaling practice, and he was talking about his gratitude practice. He's like, dude, and he knew that I wanted to create something similar to the 4-Hour Work Week, where I wanted to create a business that was a representation of who I was, and still made money. And to me, it was long term, right? It wasn't something that was like an affiliate business, which there's nothing wrong with it, but it's easy to move out of that. And I wanted to be something I could build in the long term. And so he understood that, and at the time, he just said, "Hey, you want to do this?" And I said yes. Basically, that's essentially how it started. So initially, I think what made it really great is that it didn't, like, there was no expectation in the beginning that this is going to be this or this is going to be that. It just organically came to be. And I think...
And you never jumped in head first into the business initially.
Correct.
Started on the
Correct.
side type thing.
Yeah, it wasn't. I didn't jump into head first. I think moved from what I was doing previously slowly once I saw some money coming in, and there was, it wasn't let me burn the bridges kind of situation, which is your style. And I think it's really interesting. We're great friends, but we have fundamentally different styles of how we do things. I like to move smoothly between one and the other. You like to burn bridges, period. Burn the ships and start building again. And both of them work for us, right? So it's important to know your natural style. And so that's been my background. And Alex and I, we started as essentially a side project that could become something. Became something way bigger than we ever thought it would be. And so I've honestly gotten lucky because it could have gotten either way. I wasn't, at the time, I wasn't developed enough in terms of like learning what to look for, et cetera. It just happened in the sense that Alex and I, our values kind of worked out in the long term. If they didn't work out, I would be in a shittier position because the core value drivers, like if you can't agree on that, then it's very hard to agree on what you want to happen and how you want to work together and stuff like that.
Yeah, so UJ, you kind of stumbled into this partnership and you didn't really go through the motions of vetting if it was the right fit, but it worked out, obviously. Now, knowing what you know now, because you're one of the most methodical people, like you think things through, every which way before you execute on anything. If you were to do
Which is a strength and a weakness.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it actually kind of complements with Alex because you guys are both different. We'll talk about knowing having awareness around your strengths and that kind of stuff. But what would you do differently when it comes to, I guess, vetting a potential partnership?
Well, a key component of it is also we talked about this in the car, and I think it's primary to the conversation, which is the business that you're in a partnership in or want to be in a partnership when your sole source of income. And if you believe enough in your ability to work with people and your emotional intelligence or your need to grow your emotional intelligence, because I felt like I walked into this not super emotionally intelligent, but just like a willingness to grow emotionally and a willingness to take feedback and trust each other's instincts. Like that's foundational. And so it's important. Some people are open and willing to do that. Some people aren't. And that's something everybody's got to decide on themselves. Once, because that component matters. And let's say it's not that, then the stakes are lower, essentially. And I think the core thing is you want to be partners with people you actually give a shit about, you care about, that you mentioned earlier that we have a good friend, Shah Wasman, and one of the kind of her criteria for whether she wanted to be partners with somebody is if she had them have over for dinner, like on a weekend, basically at her place. And I think that's a great filter. I just have I would probably 5 or 10x that.
Yeah.
I do. I know I do 5 or 10x that. A lot of people don't. But I want to build, like, my general natural style is I like to go deep with a small number of incredible people. That is my general, signature in life. And so I just bring that to business. And so I like to build long-term things with people I really respect. And that to me is something. Picking the right person comes down to, do I want to spend lots and lots of time with them? Can I, not go a little crazy if I spend lots of time? And more importantly, do you respect the hell out of each other? Where you could have a very heated discussion, but understand and know that we're working towards something in much, much longer term. And this is like a necessary way that friction can actually lead to improvement. Like you can have a difference of opinion, and this is actually, I would say this to be true of majority of my close relationships, is if there's any kind of tension, that tension is actually talked about and resolved or worked towards some kind of resolution in terms of awareness of my trigger or their trigger, or how could we do what the conversation we just had better.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you touched on respect, because you made mention of that in the car earlier today. And then when I was online today, I don't know if it came across on Facebook or something like that, but there was an article about Amy Cuddy's newest book. And she's the director or something to do with the psychology department at Harvard. Like she's legit academic. And in her newest book apparently made mention, like the first impression comes down to really two things that go on unconsciously in people's head. It's first is, can I trust this person, and can I respect them? Respect is obviously tremendously huge. So we'll look back on that in a second, but I want to get Chris involved. So Mr. Chris Plough recently exited his company, which was a partnership of how long, Chris? That was
10 years.
It's 10 years. And you're about to get into another partnership.
Potentially two partnerships, actually.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So you're clearly... Have you done stuff on your own?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've had... And so UJ hasn't, and he's currently in an existing partnership that's working exceptionally well for him. So, give us a little bit of context specifically with that 10-year partnership. And we'll maybe break it down to some, things you've learned, best practices, those kind of things, and why you're considering partnerships in the future, and maybe the pros and cons of both, since you've had experience with both.
Yeah, absolutely. So the genesis of the company I just exited, I was part of a software development company, and we created software that's now called Oracle Transportation Management. Oracle acquired that company. When they acquired that company, I realized I didn't want to work for Oracle. And a few months after, I left to create MavenWire. That was the company that succeeded. And it was a services company around that because we knew it best. When I first left, I didn't know anything really about consulting. I just knew that I wanted to do this. And I left and started it alone. So it was a solo endeavor to begin with. I kept getting calls in from customers who wanted to help implementing the software, training on the software, hosting the software. I knew the whole technology portion because I developed the technical architecture, but I knew nothing about the business side, how to set up the business rules so that you could ship worldwide. I started bringing in some people I knew as consultants to service that side of the business. And one of them, this gentleman, Sam, who was a friend of mine, but we'd known each other loosely, it just worked really well. His knowledge of the product completely complemented my knowledge of the product, and together we knew the whole thing. And then second, his skills. He was much more of a executor and manager, and I was much more on kind of like the leadership innovation side. And the skills that we had complement each other. And it was only after a couple of months of doing that, I sat down with him and gave him 50% of the company and said, I can't imagine us doing this without each other, so let's go into it that way. That partnership, it was one of the best business relationships that I've ever had. The amount of trust and respect, and those were two key things I wrote down because that was the basis of it. When I think about that relationship, we knew each other well enough to know that we didn't have to worry about anything happening in the back end, anything that was undue or untoward. And so trust was inherently there, and then respect, because we would have heated conversations. But each time we did, we'd come up with a better solution that was better than each of us coming in. But because we could respect each other's abilities, it wasn't a, well, what are you doing type of situation. It was collaborative in the end. At the same time, during the genesis of MavenWire, there was another type of partnership that was tried in that I knew some other people who were in Europe, and we tried a loose partnership with them. to allow them to use the MavenWire brand and use it through all of Europe. That partnership went horribly awry over time and cost me millions upon millions of dollars, to be honest with you. And that partnership didn't have the same trust and respect. It wasn't. I thought I'd actually known this person better than I knew Sam, and ended up not being the case. And wasn't very well documented, so there wasn't a lot that I could go back to at the time. And so I've had, within the context of MavenWire, relationships go two different ways. At the same time, when we got to the end of MavenWire, and this is a conversation I wish I had known and understood early on, Sam's needs and my needs were very different in trying to exit MavenWire. Sam wanted to continue MavenWire and could see that as his foreseeable future, whereas I realized that MavenWire wasn't what I wanted to do long-term in my life, and I wanted an exit, and I also wanted freedom from it, both financial freedom and responsibility freedom from the company, so that I could go after things that were much more important and much closer to my heart. That difference of opinion caused a lot of really heated conversations near the end of MavenWire, and a lot of difficulties there, where the exit process and getting acquired and everything else took a lot longer than it could have, at a time when MavenWire was under a lot of financial stress. And so, if we had exited a few years earlier, we actually would have done considerably better. But because of this mismatch when it came to exit strategies and exit needs, it caused a lot of stress and pain at the end. We still have a great relationship now, and it's worked out well, but it wasn't that good. And so I've come to looking at, when I stepped away from MavenWire initially, I said, look, I'm never going to be in a partnership again because I want complete control.
Sure.
Right? I, surprisingly, in the past several months, when I start to look at what it is that's important for me to accomplish, how can I accomplish that, and what are the needs, have split up partnerships, and whether you do or don't, into two areas. And we got down to this in the car earlier, and I think it's really simple. If you want and need complete control, go solo, right? And for some things, especially a personal brand or personal visions or something that's really close, that's absolutely the way to go. But if you're looking for scale, in some way to have massive impact, right? And one of the businesses we want to affect millions. We want to have a huge impact upon the world. A lot of times partnerships. Yeah. And that partnership may be a business owner, it may be affiliates. There's a lot of ways to do business partnerships, but I believe partnership is the absolute best way to accomplish scale.
That's incredibly well said. The one thing I just wanted to loop back on, so towards the end, you and Sam had differences of vision. Did you guys have a vision, an alignment of vision initially, and then one of you changed off that? Because I know UJ is very, very big on vision and setting a vision, and probably beats it into Alex to the importance of vision and all that kind of stuff. So were you guys very much similar to that? You guys had a vision all the way up until there was a personal shift, or did you guys always have that mismatch and you just really didn't uncover it early on?
So twofold. Number one is when we started the business, we never had a conversation around what our exit needs were or desires, right? So it was just, we'll build a successful business and the exit will become apparent. Yeah. It did become apparent. However, our needs along the way and how we were driven are very different. Sam is very much a business owner and runner, and I'm very much an entrepreneur. I want to start new things, right? And that those needs really begin to diverge. About starting 2012, 2013, I began to step away from MavenWire and trying to give more and more control to Sam so that I could find an exit in some way. Those were never really successful. And so it became apparent that we had to exit in a different way, and that was going to be a full exit. And that's when a lot of the stress came in. So these conversations could have been had much earlier. And it's funny that the partnerships that I'm looking at now, we've actually spent months talking about, and I know you'll get deeply into this, UJ, because this is dear to your heart. But your core values, your vision for the company, what your fears are in something going wrong, what is the life that you want to have? All of these things that are both the positives of the company and the negatives, the business baggage, we have laid out so that all of these difficult conversations have already been had. We know what's coming up. We know what has worked and what has not worked in past relationships. And so now we've got a sense of where each of us want to go and make sure that's aligned. And when things start to go awry, it's not a brand new conversation now. It's one that has already been begun and gives us the space to have that.
Yeah, I think it's, at least in my experience, I rush into partnerships. And it seems like you guys got into it without doing the full vetting process, but it worked out really for both of you. But there's that saying that they're easy to get into and hard to get out of. And the two that I had were, thankfully they crashed and burned really quickly, but I realized the first one was misalignment right out of the gate, where I tried to partner. Well, competitor and I partnered because we wanted to what you said, scale. And to me, that was the biggest way to kind of divide and conquer on some level. But there was two fundamental problems with that. One was we both had very similar skill sets. We were both almost identical as far as our skill set. So there's a saying, like, when two people are the same, one is not required, right, on some level. There was that. And then also very different. We never talked about alignment. Like, we just wanted to grow. But we never had a conversation of like what sacrifices we were willing to make along the way for the sake of growth. He was willing to, I was actually the one who really wanted to scale and really would work day and night to accomplish that. And he simply wasn't. He was more kind of lifestyle oriented on some level. So I think that vision out of the gate is from, my conversation with you guys and from others is incredibly crucial to have that conversation. So now that it's ongoing, especially for you, UJ, because you've been in this partnership for 4 years now in a business context, and as we said, like Alex, it's not his full-time thing, but it's your full-time thing. Like this is your livelihood on some level. How do you refine the vision? Is it a conversation that when a new opportunity comes up, do you have a conversation about like, okay, how does this affect the vision and all that kind of stuff? Or is it something you do a check-in of every couple months?
So once a year, there's Cameron Harrell's got a great book called Double Double, and he talks about the importance of a vivid vision. And the exercise of doing the vivid vision, which is essentially, imagine you're walking through the offices of your company, be it remote or local. How does that look like? What's the energy in the room? Who do you see? Where is your company now? What needs to happen 3 years from now in order for you to feel like, the growth was good. And that's about an exercise that takes me about half a day to do. Sometimes more, sometimes less. And I'll do that about once a year.
So sorry to interrupt, but so you set the vision for the company?
Yeah.
And then that's when you present it to...
And then I'll talk to Alex about it.
And get his buy-in.
And then we'll actually... But we take painstakingly. The first time he sat down, I was like, trust me, it was a half day. It's not enough. It's not enough for what we're doing. And he was like, you kidding me? I'm like, trust me. And so I was right. The first day wasn't enough because we're less than 30% through it, and we've already had so many conversations, right? We should do this, not this, right? Or this is more important than this. It's a great quote that I read. I can't remember from where, but some people, and it was fascinating, it was about relationships, and some people sleep in the same bed and dream different dreams. And that's very, very scary. Sleeping in the same bed and dreaming different dreams, because that means you're seeing a different future. And I read that and I felt incredibly grateful. Really, like it was almost emotional for me because I feel like I share the same dream with people that sleep in different beds than I do, and that's such an honor, and it's such a pleasure. It just makes me so glad that I'm creating, and it really shows to me the importance of people that lead can see what other people can't see, and they believe in something so deeply that other people can't just help believe the same thing. And there's a great power in that. And it has to be some person who's just responsible for that, and setting that in the company and reiterating it over and over again. And something that I think we also talked about in the car was Chris and I have a orientation to dive into hard conversations. If I see something not aligned, like I'll bring it up right away, because that's scary. Like seeing non-alignment, seeing that you guys aren't dreaming the same dream, because that's really, really important. And anytime, and because we also talked about this, my lack of empathy can work in my favor, and it can work against me. And I guess one of the places it's worked for me is I'll just walk into a conversation being like, we're going to have this conversation. And over the last couple of years, I've and both of you have had kind of somewhat of peek at my journey into developing empathy, into doing a ton of work on myself so I understand where the other person's coming from, and being able to communicate my feelings in a way that is not as triggering as being a lot more direct, and also being able to articulate how I feel when someone says something. So there's a great kind of technique called nonviolent communication that people can read about. There's videos about it. There's a book about it by Marshall Rosenberg. All really great stuff, because I want to get really, really good at communicating with people, because that's fundamentally what life and business is about. And if you suck at it, then like you're going to suck at life.
Yeah. Well, if you suck at it, I think in the interim, and we talked about this as well, is that I mean, partnerships are very similar to a marriage, obviously. And I've been married to my wife for 5 years, and we recently got a therapist. I mean, we've worked on a relationship in the past, but have had a steady therapist for the past. We've had a therapist in our lives for about 2.5 years, but for the last year or so, we've had a different therapist who's been actually recommended by you, and it's been absolutely kind of amazing. And it's just because both my wife and I don't have tough conversations at all. We will dilly-dally and dance around those things, and we tend to sweep things under the carpet and those kind of things. So for me, if I were to explore a partnership again, very similar to a relationship, I'd have some kind of either third party, whether it be a third partner or some kind of mentor of sorts who would play facilitator or a mediator, I guess you could say, or actually just hire a therapist. I mean, I really would definitely do that because, again, I'm not as upfront as you.
Yeah, I come at those conversations, those difficult conversations, from a different place, though, and you know this. Like my empathy can be off the charts, right? So instead of lack of empathy, think of those hard conversations.
Really cool. You get both sides of the table here.
Yeah, you do. So I don't think it's empathy or not empathy, right? We just have different orientations. But I like to have those conversations because it makes life easier, not only for me, but for the other person. It's like clearing the room. Like I know that if I step forward in this conversation, that it's going to clear the room for both of us and our lives are going to be easier. And I think that's why, again, on like this whole business partnership thing, the one that I'm in the midst of kicking off right now, we talked about an hour and a half every week for 4 months, primarily on us and our needs and what we want from the future, and what our fears were, what has worked, what hasn't worked in past business relationships. And then we got into what could this business be, what's important, the vision, and everything else, right? And I've never spent that much time at all, but that's what gives me hope. When you start to look at, do you do a partnership? Do you not? You, Jason, having been burned before, right? Me stepping away and going, I'll never do a partnership again. Mm-hmm. And this has completely changed my mind. And this was an organic process. We didn't start out to say, this is how we're going to do it. But one of the people I had actually had conversations with and helped him begin to exit from a partnership that he was having trouble with. And that conversation led into the deeper conversations with the three of us were having together and became the genesis of this.
Mm. But you did touch on that you guys are open to altering it. It's not like this 3-year thing and that's concrete,
so
drawn on the walls.
There's a couple of things. One, so Cameron Harrell's book, I think, like when you create a vision, it has to be a few people. Like it has to be at a certain stage of the business where it makes sense. In terms of revenue, it could be anywhere from multiple 6 figures to 7 figures. But you need something to create a vision of. So it's a pretty shitty idea in early stages if you just have an idea to build a vision around it. You have no clue what the market is going to say. You have no idea. You haven't tested any of this.
That's actually a great point to point out because that is ignorance on my part. Because when 3 years ago I was starting the business and I was still trying to find product market fit and where I'm going to go and all that kind of stuff.
And that's
I could do a much better job setting a vision now.
Correct.
So that's a really good point for those who are early stage.
Don't worry about any of this nonsense. Yeah. Don't worry about culture. Don't worry. Just
you're still testing. Money. You're still trying to figure out what it is you have.
That's it.
Yeah.
Focus on helping people. Focus on making money. The rest will come. Right? Like once you've done that enough and you have enough money not to worry about, then you go, okay, now let's just focus on, now we have people they're relying on me to eat, essentially. Okay, let's give them something to look at that like we all can build together, and so that's what needs to happen. Also, having a vision and not seeing it every 3 or 4 months is like not seeing it multiple times a week is kind of a problem. Like it constantly moves. It's like your future. Right? So we talk about this exercise, which is hugely important. Like anybody listening, if you've not done this, like I try to do it about once every year and a half, is to write out my ideal average day. And we also talked about this in the car, is like spend as much fucking time as possible on this. Cause it's so valuable. And I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in Jason's life, and I've seen it in multiple other friends' lives when they've done this thing and they've spent a lot of time focusing on it, working on it, crafting it. Somehow, some way, their life and opportunity and systems work out in a certain way that allows them to live that on a day-to-day just because they wrote it out one time at some point, which is on an ideal day, if you had no resort, like no constraints, geographical, financial, or people, where would you live? What would your ideal day look like if you could live it every day till you die? Some variation of it. Some people prefer a week because they have some kind of a variety and they can get that. Day, week, it doesn't matter. Just pick your thing, because what gets reflected in that is values, and doing that for your own life is incredible. But doing that for a company can be even better, because now you can scale. Now what you have just for one person, now you have for the entire goddamn company, and most people don't spend the time to think about that. Most people have never actually consciously designed their life. And so anytime you give them that, it becomes manufactured meaning. So culture is essentially manufactured meaning, very similar to church manufactures meaning for people. That's why they get attached. Just manufactured meaning is like crack to humans, because like seeing something is better than seeing nothing, and they were seeing nothing before. And so that's why it becomes really powerful, because there's someone who feels and breathes and lives the vision, and through osmosis they get to feel what the vision is. The vision isn't a piece of paper; it's a living, breathing thing that exists in the team, and it's very palpable. Like you know when you have it, you know when you don't have it. Just like it's kind of like love, but with multiple people, and less intense. So to me, like that's what it is. It's a evolving, living, breathing thing that exists, and it gets updated every time something significant happens. Every quarter, like you look at it every couple of weeks, like is this what we're moving towards? Is this what we care about? Is this what we want? And that becomes the values is what drives the vision, but the values is like the engine. The vision can change from day to day, from quarter to quarter, but that's kind of where I'm at on that.
I see a slight difference when you start to talk about like vision that's required for a partnership and starting something out, and vision that's required for like, once you've already established a company and going forward for the team, right? Yeah. I agree with you. 100% important for the team, right? Which is why, Jason, it may not have been as important to you, and it may be something that becomes more important over time. Maybe it's not for you. You get to make that choice. But most people who join your company, and as that team gets larger and communication gets a little bit harder, they're not entrepreneurs. Most of them aren't. And so they are driven in a different way. And that vision, understanding it, helps them really dig in and get through, especially the hard times. I know that one thing we were really fortunate about is we created an incredible culture, and this team and the vision was palpable at MavenWire. And we went through some incredibly hard times, right? And that is what kept us together. And people have come to me and said that is why we didn't leave. We had such little attrition when we were having like some of the darkest times of the company ever, and people just dug in and went with it. But in the beginning, when we're talking about partnerships here, what I found, and I really wish I could say where this came from. I don't. James Ton had brought it up, and we began talking about it this way. We agreed on the why, right? And the why was most important because that's core values. This is why we're doing these things together. This is why we want to make a difference. This is why we're going to form together in this deep bond. Then we talked about the how. What skills do we bring together, and how do they complement each other? What ability do we have to change the market or to work in this way? And only then do we begin to talk about the what. And the what was, okay, what services is right there. And the what is actually the loosest thing that we talked about because it's so malleable early on in a company. And you have to test it in the market and figure out how the what fits. But the why and the how very rarely change as much. And so I get to alignment on those and allow the what to adjust to the market. Once you know those and it begins to test it, then you can start to set the whole vision down and say why, what, how we do everything. And this is how it might look over the next year. And then once the company solidifies a little bit more, then maybe over the next 3 years. But to come out the gates as you know, with a Cameron Herald and say, look, from the beginning, we're going to do a 3-year plan. No, I don't think that's right.
So we talked about, I guess one thing I'll chime in, and feel free to share any best practices that come to mind. I've written a few down myself, or experiences that I've learned the hard way that hopefully some people can learn from. But another thing that maybe you can challenge me on is my philosophy, I guess, that you should never do a deal that can potentially put you on the street. Meaning, like, the way I look at partnerships now is that the only partnerships I would consider, because I've had 2 failed ones, and we talked about why they were failures, but I would only do a partnership now where I could walk away and still be in an okay position. So, like, and to what you said, you actually touched on this, Chris, which I thought was brilliant. Like, if it's something super important, like personal brand or those kind of things, in those cases, really, you want full control. But what are both of your philosophies on that? I mean, UJ, you're in a position where you are 100% in, and that is your livelihood. Do you think anything wrong with that thinking per se? Is there anything?
I think it really comes down to self-awareness. And what I mean by that is if I were you, I wouldn't get into a partnership. Currently, right now, this time and place, I wouldn't get into a partnership that could potentially put you out of business. Because that's where you are. Like, you don't trust your ability. And I wouldn't if I was you, because I wouldn't, because if you have a shitty history and you want to be careful that you're taking the right steps, and that's too far of a stretch to partner with somebody confident that you can make your livelihood with them, right? So that's tough. That's a tough stretch to make. Thankfully, I had a pretty formative experience in my mid-teens where through the sequence of a reading of books, which is why I love books, it's just such a great tool for insight, I learned that a lot of pretty much all my friends weren't my actual friends. And this was in India, and this is pre-Canada. And so I'm having this realization hit me, and it felt like my reality just flipped on itself. It was like someone showed me something that was true for the longest time, and I just saw it. And it probably hurt me more than any breakup I've probably ever had. And it made me really not trust myself and my ability to evaluate people. I care about people deeply. I care about people's growth, probably more than most of them care about their own.
I was about to say.
I really do, and it comes out in honesty, and comes out in my care, and sometimes that has come across as aggressive in the past. And so I went down this journey of it was 16 at the time, and I promised myself I will never make another friend unless I learn how to recognize what a friend is, how to know whether this is someone I can trust versus someone I can't. How do I know this? And guys, it took me another 3 years to make a friend. And I came to Canada when I was 17, so it was 19 when I knew that this was a friend. And it was a very lonely part of my life because I came to Canada alone, and essentially spending a lot of time solo. But I know what it felt like, and his name is Maurizio, and he's still in my life right now. He lives in Africa, and he's one of my, again, a dear friend. And ever since, I've just made dear friends. That pain has actually been very useful for me. That's when I started journaling, seriously. I was like, what is going on? How do I recognize who to trust? Because I realized I couldn't trust myself. I couldn't trust a lot of things. That was unacceptable to me. And so I think that worked out. because that's how I got interested in personality testing. It's how I got interested in my own personality, how to make myself better, make other people better, and inadvertently, it's led me to build partnership, because a partnership is just a really fucking great friendship. It's a really great thing. Like, I honestly think, like, I was thinking about this. I was talking with Dev earlier. I have writing accountability with Dev from Monday to Friday from 7 to 9. So we're writing a book, as you both of you guys know, individual books. And I looked at him and said, I don't think I have a good friend I'm not actively creating something with. We have a call every month and a half. We sit down every 90 days. And we talk. We talk a lot more often than that. And then we're still creating. We're still holding each other to a wonderful standard. And same with Dev, same with Alex. Like, the people that I care about in my life, like, I'm constantly creating. And so I think it happened because I recognized what was important to me. Like truth, growth, like intense friendship, honesty, having fun. Like, these things are important to me. And I think that just comes from a natural extension of that.
So do you think, so you're saying I should not consider, what would be, I guess, so you know where I am now.
Yeah.
And it seems like there has to be some kind of shift.
I would test stuff with people. Something small, something like, if it works, great. If it doesn't, no biggie. Right? Test small things that might have potential with people that you want to work with. And then see how it evolves. Like, there's two sides of the picture, right? You can do that, or you can dig in with both feet in and really say, I want to see, similar to what Chris did with his business partners, is I want to really work with somebody and flesh that out over time. I suspect that's not your style. I suspect your style is just do it.
So I actually agree with him. I think that I wouldn't jump into that like feet first if I were you. I would test, like he's saying, like lighter weight partnerships, and I would have full disclosure going in and say, look, I have a bit of a fear of partnerships, and because there's a couple things that have gone wrong, and here are those fears, and here's how I behave when those fears at least seem to be apparent, right? And that way it's open there and it becomes a learning thing. For me, trust, and UJ, we're really similar here. We haven't had this conversation before. For me, like, real trust has to be proven in some way. You have to be in a situation with somebody when they have a choice to either take care of themselves or to consider you and help take care of you along the way, right? And it's only when it's proven can trust be just forgotten and believed it's in the background. Until then, there's just a faith, and there's always a little bit of insecurity that's in it. And the people that I'm getting into a partnership, one of them specifically, James Wallace, in one of the toughest times I've had in recent years, he had my back deeply last year. And we now, over the past few years, have proven that ability to trust each other in our own integrity to a point where there is just zero question. And that zero question allows us to move forward and to make decisions and work together at speeds that are almost incomprehensible, because you're not second guessing everything. You're not covering your ass. You're not doing any of these other things. That's the only way that a real deep partnership works. And so when I talk about looking for a partnership and trust, that's the level I'm looking at. Like, there is no consideration. It's like SEAL Team 6 type trust, where you're not even looking at the guy on your right because you know he's got that side of you. You're just focused on the thing that you can do, and you move forward at such a speed that it allows for exponential growth, right? Which is why we're doing what we're doing. And it's a very different dynamic. You're not going to jump into that immediately. Yeah. You've got some, just trust issues, and you have some other things to work out along the way. Baby step it in. There's no reason to jump like full head into like the deep end of the pool with this.
And just to kind of follow up on the kind of trust issues, like, I had real trust issues when I was 16, and you know what? They were valid, right? Like, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to recognize a great person or a friend that I would get along with. And I'm a pretty polarizing guy. Like, you either like me or you don't. Like, it's going to be pretty clear. Pretty early on, and so I learned to accentuate parts of myself that was polarizing. So it just happened early, and there's different levels of partnerships you can also do. Like the partnership that Chris is talking about is deep, right? It's deep, it's full, it's all in, it's let's go. And there are different kinds and styles of partnership. Like that's similar style to a partnership I have with Alex. And I'm going to have other partnerships in the future that might not be as all in.
You might consider like an affiliate relationship a type of partnership.
Exactly.
Right? And so they can be really loose or they can be really deep.
Exactly.
They may have zero control of your business and still be a partnership, or they may have 50-50 control of your business. You get to choose that level.
And so I would just test stuff and see what works and just move it from there. Especially stuff that doesn't actually blimp too much. Like doesn't put much of a blimp on your radar.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, I have no partnerships on the horizon per se, but as we talked about, part of me is almost kind of jealous watching others who have partners in business at times, because I feel like it can really divide and conquer. And I know especially seeing somebody like what you and Alex have, where you guys do complement each other very much. So like there's a little bit of overlap, but really not much. You guys are very, very different. And I know I'm at a point now where back when I was looking at partnerships, I didn't have a clear understanding of my strengths and weaknesses. I probably had a lot of ego playing into it. Probably didn't want to share too much of the praise of like the success of the business. Had a hard time probably sharing profits as well when it came down to it. But again, I think a lot of that stemmed from, a big component was I didn't have, again, strong awareness around my strengths and didn't understand like the importance of having somebody on board that could balance me out. I mean, we talked about the fact that I did I did an event with Chris Hadfield, the famous Canadian astronaut. And that was the first time I ever spoke to somebody who was like complete polar opposite to me. And I was like so drawn to it because he was mission control for like 21 space shuttle launches for NASA. And he went to space 3 times, went around the Earth 26,000 times. Like he's legit. And he was also the top rated pilot in the U.S. Navy and the Air Force. So the best of the best. But I mean, when he came in and I was working with him, we were doing the dry run for the event because he was going to speak and all that kind of stuff. He took control of the room and the conversation, was straight to the point, very just tactical and methodical, things that I'm not. Like I'm very much like fly by the seat of my pants and oops, I forgot to double check that, and you don't realize till you're already in it and all that kind of stuff. He was not. I was like, my God, if I had somebody like him working for me, I could take on the world. So now that I'm, again, getting much more clear on my strengths and weaknesses, I've never been more open than now on some level for partnerships. But for you guys, what do you I mean, again, you guys are both, but I mean, UJ hasn't been an entrepreneur for a long time, but he's been incredibly self-aware all of his life. Chris, you've been an entrepreneur for a long time and also incredibly self-aware. What do you, when it comes to getting clear on your strengths and weaknesses, are there tools that you guys use when it comes to assessing your potential business partners? Like, what does that look like? Is it conversations? Is it trial runs? Is it references?
I would say if you're getting references, then you're not doing it.
Yeah.
Of trusting yourself. So, a couple things. I think if kind of following that same question, I think we talked about this earlier in the car as well about how Chris and I are more kind of conflict forward and you're conflict avoidant, and it's good to know that because you can work with that and figure out what you need. But I would definitely, if I were ever you looking for a long-term partnership, I would look for somebody who's actually conflict forward, who likes having those conversations. You need somebody in the room, at least one person, who is open and is the one that's constantly putting it on the table. And it doesn't matter who it is as long as there is one person doing that. Or you have some kind of system, as you mentioned, like a mediator or someone who helps you talk it through. In terms of like learning how to build self-awareness, journaling is a staple of mine that I use, and currently actually the book I'm writing is really how to use journaling as a way to develop self-awareness, similar to meditation. Personality testing is a great one, and really going deep with it. So
before we go too deep on personality testing, can you give us Because I've always misunderstood when you say journaling. Because I'm like just recounting my day, like almost taking a snapshot of my day. Like that's the way I've always understood it. But you actually go deep with certain questions.
Yeah, you don't have journaling unless you have questions, at least for me.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Like it's the questions, even if that question is as simple as why. And asking why multiple times until you get down to a deep truth versus the superficial.
Yeah, so I'm incredibly ignorant when it comes to journaling because, again, I'm thinking of like 13-year-old girls writing about boys and stuff, right?
That's exactly the perception that I'm looking to flip. So,
sure.
Yeah.
So can you give us some context before we skim over what journaling is?
Yeah.
Really what you mean by using journaling as a tool for self-awareness.
Yes, I will.
What has helped you to reach that level of self-awareness? And more importantly, if you're meeting somebody that's a newer person in your life, so not like a long-term relationship or anything like that, but a newer person, and you're trying to assess their strengths and weaknesses, and maybe they don't have the same awareness. What are some ways you do that?
So a couple things. One is I want UJ to get into journaling. He's a deeper expert than I am, but I'm going to give you the same answer. Like journaling is a huge part of it, and journaling in a way where you really begin to understand what motivates you, what your ambitions and values and all the deeper things that drive you are, and also as much, what are the fears and what are the things that you avoid, so that you can be open and share them with people, right? And I think that's valuable in any relationship. It doesn't have to be business. So I get down to that level of both core values and core fears and share that in a way so that it's just out there, it's open, it's not something that's waiting to be discovered in a Pandora's box that's going to blow up. I do also look at personality tests, but again, UJ is going to he digs deep into them. I use them as a general understanding. For me, the whole process is significantly more intuitive. It's, how do I feel about this person? But I'm much more empathetic than UJ is. So I use that empathy to help gauge people and see where they are. At the same time, I believe in testing relationships and taking stair steps up. So the two business partnerships that I'm looking at creating, have created and we're looking to take further, are built off of relationships where I've known the person for at least a year, often 2 and 3 years. Because it's that level of knowing each other that gives me the confidence to go this deep with somebody. If it was somebody who just came up to me and maybe I only knew them for a week or something along those lines, there would have to be smaller tests or smaller things that we do in order to work it out. And it doesn't have to be business. We could travel together. There's a lot of different ways to be able to test that relationship first and understand how we both behave under stress. How do we interact with each other? How, what type of conversations do we have once the formality of being nice to each other really starts to break down? And only then can you really understand that. So I do not jump into business partnerships, especially ones that are going to be lengthy or deep, off the drop of a hat or just purely off of gut intuition. There has to be something proven there.
So testing relationships, one thing I want to just really highlight that UJ pointed out about Shaw Wasman. So Shaw Wasman, Mastermind Talks Year 1, was on a panel with Dan Martell and James Altucher, and she made mention that she never considers a partnership unless, not only unless they would have her, she would have them at her house for the weekend, but she almost insists that that person has to stay at her house for a weekend. And I was actually considering a partnership with somebody 2 years ago, and was up until that point a pretty good friend who but at most I'd probably spend 2 hours with him at a time. And oddly enough, we came to the Bahamas on a trip. We were here for 4 days, and after the first day and a half, 36 hours, I was going to kill him. And I was so grateful that I did that little exercise of sorts to test the relationship, because it was incredible. I got to see him, and I got to see his true colors really quickly, and how we mismatched very early on, and I was just incredibly grateful for that. So when you talked about testing relationships, I really want to kind of highlight that point. But I didn't know you journaled as well, so this is I feel like completely left
quite
out.
a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about this in depth. It's been solid.
Dude, I'm an amateur around you guys. I don't have a vision. I don't journal. Jeez.
UJ and I are actually incredibly similar, coming at it from different aspects. So he's coming at things hugely intellectually, trying to gain empathy. And I'm coming at things much more empathetic and intuition and going a little bit towards the other side.
So, UJ, give us some, we were going to talk about really two things. One was journaling, and the other one was behavioral profile testing and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So
And
journaling.
So it ties in together really well for self-awareness. So most people think, when they think of journaling, they think of 13, 16-year-old journaling because their boyfriend or girlfriend left them, right? And that's a legitimate form of journaling, nothing against it. That's completely the opposite of actually what I do when I journal. And this is actually a conversation I've had with several people, which is actually leading me to write the book I'm writing, which is like, you can journal for results. It's actually how I journal. I don't really know how to do any other way of journaling. Is every journaling session usually starts with a question, and the question could be anything from, why did I do this one thing that didn't serve me yesterday? And usually I was joking to Candace, Jason, and Chris over lunch yesterday that I have a wonder list of the things that I want to dig into about myself. I have like a separate folder, things to dig into. And sometimes there are things to dig in with my therapist, we share that. And sometimes it's just things to dig into in the journal. And then let's say I'm opening up a journal entry tomorrow. I'll just look at the list, look at what I want to tackle, and I'll pop it into my question, like, what's going on there, right? And it's almost like I have this connection. It builds this connection between my conscious mind and my unconscious mind, where we like move through the puzzle, and you solve the problem, and we solve like, what was it about me that made me do that? And I'm isolating. I'm like, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful zone of problem solving. You're getting to the bottom of a deep truth about the way you are, about the world, the way where the world operates. And it's a much more, it's really profound understanding of how you show up in the world and how you can become better. And so, to me, self-awareness is orienting towards truth and knowing that the human mind and ego is so attached to who we are as these temporary beings on this planet that it's actively shielding you against truth that can make your life better. And so all I'm looking to do is realign with that truth, because with truth you have results, right? Dan Sullivan has this great quote: "All progress starts with telling the truth." And I'm just looking to find out what the truth is. Mm-hmm. And so that's what a typical journaling session is for me. And when I do personality testing, I go deeper with it than anybody I know, because I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to see. Personality test is like, let's say you have Chris right here. It's like a spotlight from that angle on Chris. It's not going to capture everything. It's going to capture a sliver of what it does, and sometimes it's about 60 to 80% accurate. Beyond that, it's not. Mm-hmm. And so, having multiple lights helps us see Chris better.
Mm-hmm. So we go for multiple personality tests, mm-hmm. right? That all show something slightly different, and also become the basis of a conversation, right? Yep. So we can talk about this and start to get into an aspect using the personality test as a starting point. Exactly.
So both of you actually had this experience with me. Is I've done the disc with you. And we've done the disc as well, because you actually were the person who told me about disc. And I talk about personality tests all the time. And what's your type? This is just fascinating to me as a human, but it's very advantageous, because that builds self-awareness about how you guys work together. Like his eye is off the charts on the disc. My eye is like about medium. He leads, yours are probably off the charts as well. And so both of you are kind of intuitive, kind of quick decision makers. I like to test stuff before I start, pulling the trigger. When I pull the trigger, I pull it hard. So just knowing that those nuances about each other helps us know each other better, but also work together in a way that seems very natural. It feels very automatic, but there's actually a lot of work behind it.
Yeah, what you want to do is be able to get to a way of working together where there's very little effort expended, and so that's how you'd achieve flow. Right? You're not forcing yourself to work in a particular way, and it's not draining you. You're actually being reinvigorated by the way you work and the way you work with somebody. Yeah. I think the reason that you and I have both hit a certain level of self-awareness and journaling specifically, and you said it, and I loved that you did, it's that seeking truth, right? And so what I've come to understand is I value truth over comfort, and I would rather know an uncomfortable truth than to be shielded by a comfortable false, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly debriefing. Why did I behave this way? Why was that uncomfortable to me? What is it about that seems to be bothering me? And digging into all of those via journaling, via meditation. I've done it via psychedelics. Like there's a lot of ways to dig into those, and I'm constantly doing it. And that's how you get down to it. Journaling just happens to be one of the easiest and most accessible methods for people to do it.
That's interesting. I mean, like I said, I've never. I know UJ, you've told me about journaling and all that kind of stuff, but to hear like that you and Chris both do it.
And let me break it down for you, because like when you think it, ink it, because you will think better on paper than you will think like on pretty much any other medium. Like I journal on Evernote personally, but when it comes to hard problems, I actually need to like solve them on paper.
The one thing I'll add to that, and I agree with you, though I have, and I'm not going to take this too far in this end, but I've done psychedelics, and I've sat down and had conversations by typing them out with me and my subconscious, right? It loosens that barrier. But as far as journaling goes, sometimes it's written, sometimes it's drawings, sometimes it's like little like thought bubbles and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be word for word for word. You choose the method that seems to be like most natural for you. So just the act of writing it, the act of getting it down on paper, even if it's incomprehensible to anybody but you, doesn't matter.
And do you go? So let's say there's something I want to dig deeper into. Would you set time aside and go as deep as you can in that time? Like you go as deep as you can, and then let's say you can't go deep enough. Do you revisit it at a later date?
Absolutely.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And twofold. I do two things here. Number one is, yes, you revisit it at a later date, and it's like an onion. You will always find additional layers. And eventually, I think you do come down. I call them like truths with capital T and truths with little case t, right? Little truths are the ones that aren't completely 100% true at the core, but they're good enough for now. And eventually, if you dig far enough, you get to a capital T, which is just a truth about you and your life, right? I now understand my core wound and what it is that drives me when I'm fearful. And that is a capital case T, and now I know how to start addressing it. But it's taken me a while to get to it, right? The other side of this is surrounding yourself with people who love you so much that they are willing to like show you something uncomfortable, even knowing it's going to make you uncomfortable, but knowing that it's the right thing to challenge you with. And if you're not surrounded by those people, because we can't see everything, even on journaling, you can't see everything. If you're not surrounded by them, then you're not getting the full vision of who you are and what you're working with.
I mean, that's definitely been my approach. Because I consider myself like pretty self-aware, probably not as self-aware as UJ or even you, Chris, but I do tend to think I'm pretty self-aware. But I don't do journaling, but I am blessed to surround myself with people who will call me out and have no problem giving me feedback. I mean, there's a handful of occasions that you yourself, Chris, have like reached out to me and said, either A, you heard through somebody else, or, that something should be on my radar, and you're the one who kind of stepped up and was willing to kind of share those things with me. And I've always been, I hope, very kind of gracious and grateful about it, because I really do take that very seriously. And UJ, that's his nature to call you out on things, which is beautiful. Like to surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth. So that's been my method of awareness. But now seeing that like journaling is really that next thing, because I've realized the power of writing when writing specifically like for the podcast and those kind of things, and I'm like, oh, that's why I do that. But I've never created a list of things I need to work on or things I need to dig deeper on, and then revisit it at a later time with a question or as a question, and then just start digging as deep as I can. So I think that's that can only help me go even deeper than I'm already going through just general feedback from very close friends. Yeah,
I go at it in a slightly different way. Instead of keeping a list of what I need to work on, since the meditation retreat that you set up, right? I meditate every day, right? And in that meditation, every once in a while, something will pop up, and it's just like that's what's been driving me. That's right. Or I'll have a dream, and I'll wake up from the dream. Like I had one last night that was anxiety filled, and was a particular moment in my life, and I can just drive it from there. And I used that prompting that this is going on in my subconscious right now. It's been brought up to say, now I should sit down and write about it and journal about it. So rather than keeping a list that I'm going to kind of check through over time, I allow the moment, the intuition, the subconscious to drive what I should look at now, and do it more in the moment. So there's lots of different techniques. It's just a matter of doing it.
Yeah.
And all these things kind of really compound on top of each other. You have let's say a therapist. You have journaling practice. I float pretty regularly.
Do you float as well, Chris?
I do, yeah.
I can't do it.
So you got to find your style, right? So all these things I do like once a quarter. I do a deep dive psychedelic run, and so all of these kind of feed into each other.
I didn't know that.
What? You've known about this
Every quarter?
Every quarter, yeah.
I know.
What?
I was about on the same schedule, about once a quarter or so.
Really?
Yeah. It's really valuable, and the level, and because you're taking all of these things, you're looping them together, and you're diving into something where you can have absolute like resolution. True resolution is really hard because you're healing your core wound.
Yeah,
like that's some hard stuff, and like getting real traction on that in a quarter or 2 quarters, like that's phenomenal progress. And so the only way you're gonna achieve that is by an intensive kind of method of like let's dive into like what this is and let's solve this, because if you're not even looking at the thing, it's hard to change it. So all of them essentially, they're all of these practices: journaling, meditation, therapy, exercise, your way of getting flow, psychedelics, if that's your thing. Like all of them are essentially like different windows into the truth. But like from kind of what Chris and I are saying, we love truth so much that a lot of this stuff isn't very comfortable or nice, right? This isn't like a typical dinner conversation. But I love this shit. I can't have enough of it, and Chris is similar. And
yeah, you love it. I'm just compelled and driven to find it, right? So I don't know if I love it per se, but I have to. I have to seek truth in me and in others. Yeah. That's why it was so uncomfortable that there wasn't closure with this guy, because I didn't understand the truth of what had happened. Bothers me when I don't know truth.
And what Chris is a beautiful way of seeing that in people. Like he's deeply empathetic. He wants to see in his eyes what he meant.
Yeah.
And you can see that like in the way Chris interacts with everybody. Like he wants to see the truth in people's eyes.
Well, that's why I ask people their stories and try to understand, because then I understand their motivations and what's going on about them. I understand their truth, and that's deeply important to me.
And so you'll see this point of truth with Chris. Like every time he asks you, "How are you?" he'll look at you with those eyes, like incredibly present, because he gives a shit about your truth. I really appreciate that about you.
Thank you.
It's actually awkward as hell, I will say.
It can be.
Because nobody else does that. They're like, "How are you?" It's very...
No, but it's awkward because, frankly, it makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right?
I've been in that situation. I feel like saying, "Oh, things are good," may not be enough sometimes. You know what I mean? So I can't just get off by like some surface level answer. Chris really wants to know how I'm doing.
Yeah, he wants to know. Yeah. Like he cares.
Yeah.
And so like that level of intimacy is difficult to sometimes receive. And that's what's going on. Yeah. Like it's a really, and that's something to dig into. Again, we have different approaches still, right? So I make a list, he doesn't.
But that just gives people listening breadth. You choose the way that works for you. The one little caveat I put on this is I seek truth, as do you, right? The kindness I would love people to offer themselves is to realize that understanding the truth can sometimes be enough. You don't have to fix everything, right? It's not like you're going to ever be completely healed and we are perfect beings. Nobody here's a perfect being. I'm never going to be a perfect being. No offense. Neither are you. Neither is anybody listening. So just understanding yourself and then just allowing that to be enough can be enough, right? Some things get better. Some things you get easier and the wound lessens. Some things never do, and you just understand how to work with it.
That awareness is key. I mean, there's that saying, "The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know."
And the devil you can share with other people so they understand as well, right? Because the problem is when you step on somebody's wound you don't know, they react some way, and you're like, "What the did I do?"
Sure.
Like it throws everything off. But if I know like you're a certain way and then you react, I'm like, oh man, I know why. Jason's an awesome guy. He cares. He loves everything else. This is just hard for him. Cool. We'll work through it.
Yeah.
And again, that's when we're talking about business partnerships, relationships, everything else. That's why having this understanding of self and then taking it one step further and sharing it with somebody else. That's the key to a deep relationship, no matter where it is in your life.
Boom.
Boom.
Dude, this is way better than that conversation we had in the car. Take that, Rob.
We did go like 2 levels deeper in this conversation
that was great.
than we did.
There's almost like 2 episodes there, one on self-awareness in general. That was really great.
And kind of story journaling is a thing. I can start talking for a while on this, but to me, the beauty about journaling is it's just an avenue for self-expression. It's a beautiful way for me to dive into the stuff I love, which is looking at a problem and solving it. And I've seen such tangible progress in my life because of it, that I recently I was doing a test. I was talking to Jason about this. I was doing a personality test, and some of it has like skills testing questions, and I spent twice as long as the test actually was supposed to be because I just couldn't pull myself away from the puzzles. And especially like if the puzzle has an object at the end of it, oh man, good luck pulling me away from that screen. And to me, like journaling is just a more productive way of doing that because I am able to dive deeper into the truth of what I know, and truth allows progress to happen. And I enjoy progress, but I think I love truth more than I actually enjoy progress, which is an interesting realization. And different people have different ways of doing this, but what if you knew at the end of the page, right, or the end of the session, you knew yourself just a little bit better, right? You felt just a little bit more comfortable with yourself, a little bit more open, a little bit more alive, a little bit more loving. That's what journaling does for me. Just allows me to feel I'm just a little bit better than I started today.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful, beautiful feeling.
I think it's time for me to start journaling. Not tonight because it's like 11:30 at night. Journaling and doing a vision, which maybe we'll do when we do our little quarterly. We're going away for a day, 2 days,
something like that.
I'm so excited.
It's a good time.
Yeah. We're doing that every quarter. We have it scheduled. UJ and I are going away for a day or two to work on the hard stuff. But any parting words regarding partnerships? Don't get at them. That's mine. Anybody else?
Know yourself.
Know yourself and share it with the person who you're thinking about a partnership with, and encourage them to do the same. Because if you step in with a certain level of vulnerability, you've now created a safe space where they can do the same. I think that's why it's important to take that first step.
Agreed.
That was beautiful. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for episode 9. For show notes and resources mentioned in this episode, visit the Community Made group. If you're not a member, I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's free. Simply visit communitymade.com to get access. Also, quick shout out to our reviewer of the week, Yasir, who said, I personally felt that the podcast space was saturated, but this new podcast by Jason is top notch. I really liked his 3rd episode, which is part of season 1, where he talks about the perfect calendar exercise. I love his interview style, and most of the guests are his friends. They are able to open up in a different way. Highly recommend this podcast to anyone looking for insights from real entrepreneurs. Thank you, Yasir. You're my man. You're my boy, Blue. If you enjoyed the podcast, I would be forever grateful if you got the word out by sharing it with a friend, rating it on iTunes, or leaving a review like Yasir did. I am Jason Gaynard. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today on the Community Made Podcast.